Everybody, you're very welcome. Hello to everybody in the room and hello to everybody online. To those online, I will be keeping an eye on the chat, and if there are any questions or any issues with audio, please just pop it into the chat. So I am very delighted today to welcome Michael Foley for our Engagement Seminar Series. So Michael is the Civic Engagement for Societal Impact Manager at Trinity College Dublin. So he has been a coordinator of the National Open Research Forum project entitled Engaged, develop a national roadmap for public involvement in open research. We're very much looking forward to speaking about that today. Prior to this, Michael was the program manager for Trinity's Ignite office and was a research and development officer at the Trinity Centre for Ageing and Intellectual Disability during his establishment phase.
I'm still in my establishment, I'm sure.
He's a member of the board of the St. John of God's Research Foundation, and he's worked for many years previously in the public sector and the NGOs. So I'll hand it over to you, and you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak about a project we worked on for almost 2 years around public involvement in open research, the Engaged project. So I primarily present the results of this rather than, I do appreciate oftentimes people are interested in the methodological approach and how we did what we did, but today and all of that will be readily available. This is an open research project, and therefore we will be making data sets available. We will be having open published papers from this and a report. So you can read all of that after your lecture. What I want to focus on today is what people told us, what people said, the conversations they had, what emerged out of that in terms of people's vision for how we can build and co-create and work together in the development of a landscape that is around public involvement in research. So without further ado, and one thing that we did do in terms of the project is that we wanted to make sure, because people were coming from very, very different backgrounds and environments, and some people were terribly important and other people felt that they weren't quite as important, even though to us they were. We wanted to ensure that we created different opportunities for people to engage, to express themselves. So we did, as part of a number of the workshops, we created zines as well. So people created these small DIY self-published publications, and that gave them the opportunity, after a lot of the interaction and engagement, to just sit with their own thoughts and make something. And we thought then, when we actually finished the project, wouldn't it be nice to be able to give people a little copybook? And then we thought, okay, well, what's going to be on the copybook? And so we chose some of the zines from that. So there's some on your tables there. Please take them away, because most importantly at the back is a QR code that will take you to the report as well. So there's never a free lunch as far as I'm concerned. There's always, for every free gift, it takes you a little bit closer to being able to understand people's wishes. So I think it's always useful to start, for people who aren't necessarily involved or especially interested in the kind of larger Irish open research agenda, that for people like me and my librarian colleagues, we've been talking about this for a long time in terms of open access to publications and open research data. But the Irish agenda goes much broader than that. And oftentimes people don't realise that in the National Action Plan for Open Research, they're also talking about things like open source software, they're talking about open educational resources, and they're talking about open workflows and citizen science as well. As far as the National Open Research Forum is concerned, all of these things form part of open research. And if you look internationally at UN conceptualizations of things like open research and open science, you'll see all of that in there. there is an element in there which is always about public engagement and about the meaningfulness of scientific or academic work to other eyes and other people who potentially could really benefit from it, who can then interact with it in terms of their own work and their own experience as well. And just to be clear, because oftentimes when people said, well, what's Engaged all about? And the easiest thing to tell them was, we're making a roadmap. And we did, we did do that. But actually, what we were doing is, in terms of our objective, it was to build a network with the knowledge, insights, and capacity to co-create and implement an evidence-informed public involvement in open research roadmap with agreed actions, timelines, and key performance indicators. So the roadmap is great, and it's some physical evidence that anybody who comes from a marketing background, it's physical evidence of what it is that we're doing. But actually, the people in this room and the people online and all of the other people that we've met so far in UCC, in SCTU, in Trinity, in DCU, all of those people who have said, I'm really interested in this, I'm really interested in some of the stuff that came up in the roadmap, I'd like to be more involved. You're the objective, if you like. It's for you to network with your colleagues, to get into rooms with colleagues who you might not often get a chance to talk to. And we've seen that over and over again in other contexts where two people who work in the same institution who have never spoken are suddenly realizing that they should have met each other 20 years ago when they really needed to meet each other. And yet they had to actually carve out their own path when in fact they could have done that together. So this is one of those intersection points where there are people all over the country who are interested in what you're interested in. And potentially we have that opportunity to go just enough above the parapet to be able to see all of our allies in other locations, be they in academic locations, be they in public sector locations, be they in NGO locations, be them community members, be them peer researchers in other parts of society. So I won't, as I said, go into the methodology, but we had fantastic engagements and workshops, and we did a lot of different types of work. We used a lot of Post-its, and we even created some fake money so that we could see where people wanted investment to go. And we went around the country, but we also endeavored to try to bring in voices into those rooms that don't usually get to talk about this stuff. And so peer researchers, let's say, who are involved in community work at a very grassroots level, getting them in, getting them to talk about it and think about how this kind of work affects them. And also getting our colleagues from the library world, I think Jane Burns there, who I think is still teaching on the library and information courses here in UCD, getting them in terms of looking at systems and structures and infrastructures. But like I say, all of that, in terms of the how we did it, I would like to spend my time today talking about what emerged. And really, because it's a roadmap, we decided that we would have, from the data and from what emerged from the data, that we would have 5 destinations, 5 things that emerged that are quite clearly a kind of a bringing together of all of the things that people had expressed that they wanted, but also that they were willing to offer. So the 5 areas, the 5 destinations were that people wanted research that reaches everyone. So it's about making research accessible while demonstrating why it matters to all. Now, it's not that all research matters to all people. And it's not that people, this is easier to say in other places. I think if I ran out onto the street, I'd be about 2 hours by the time I actually dragged the person from the street back in here. But the thing is that people aren't necessarily interested in research in the abstract. But if you have a parent with dementia, you are interested in how their home can be adapted. if you have a brother with an intellectual disability, you are interested in what are the issues around his long-term supports that he might need to live independently. Research is amenable to all of that. You may be interested in the fact that you can look out the window and see the sea, and are worried that you will see too much of it in 20 years' time. You know, our lives are full of opportunities where research can play a role, and it's in a room like this where people are engaged in research. That's a given, but it's not a given outside of universities. And it was important, I think, to be able to explore that. The second part was about fair partnership. Lots of people in this room are working with groups, they're working with organizations, they're working with particular, incredibly passionate, sometimes very annoying individuals who really, really care very deeply about stuff. And what we appreciate is that power imbalances occur there, and that there is a need to build on mutual strength. So fair partnership was part of that. And sometimes, of course, it is the researchers, it is the academics who are the ones in the less powerful situation and have to negotiate the power imbalance there. So it's not just about researchers needing to check themselves. It is that thing about being able to negotiate who has power in what situation. The third part had initially started to be about training and education, and the more the data started to speak to what it is we were looking at, the more we had to admit and acknowledge that actually this was about knowledge as exchange. And we had kind of come to it a little bit as a deficit model that, oh, well, you know, people need to know about research and they need to know about what we're doing, as if they were kind of half full vessels that needed to be filled with what we wanted to fill them with. And actually, it's not that at all. It is about the fact that people, the whole point of actually engaging with people was that we wanted to try and understand where they were coming from. We wanted some of their knowledge, some of their perception, some of their experience, and they wanted some of ours. So it was very much about knowledge as experience. Then we wanted systems that worked. Of course, everybody wants systems that worked, but also with the caveat that we want systems that people actually wanted to use. And even today, we were talking about that idea that you can have a fantastic system, you can have a wonderful GIS map of something, but if all of the information all appears at once and it's completely overwhelming, that then can be a problem. So it's about tailoring systems to the kinds of audiences that may want to use them. And finally, it is that piece about communities shaping research priorities. And just to be clear, I suppose when we talk about communities, they may be geographical communities, they may be communities of interest, they may be communities of practice. So in other words, civil servants may be a community of practice. A number of NGOs in a particular area, the area of homelessness, let's say, may be a community of practice. So a community is a grouping of stakeholders that come together in order to do something. So under each of these destinations, there's quite a bit in the roadmap in terms of what people wanted. So I'm going to kind of give you the top line, if you like, of these. And then when you go and look at the roadmap, you can see what's embedded in each of these. So for research that reaches everyone, people wanted open access to publicly funded research. What a surprise that the money that people paid for to go into the creation of research, that they actually wanted open access to that. They wanted plain language research summaries. Most people who have applied for research funding in this room know that a lot of funders require plain language summary of what it is that you're going to do, so that the reviewers get a sense of what you're doing. What happens to those? You know, we know that we can do them. Certain technologies make it a lot easier for people to do them now. Why can't we have more plain language summaries of the kinds of research that people are doing? Researchers are supported in public communication. it is a truth universally acknowledged that no researcher comes out of the womb ready to be interviewed on Morning Ireland. And therefore, we do appreciate that this is an opportunity for people to be able to build the kind of public communication skills that they want or they need. For some people, it is about traditional media. For other people, it may be about new media. For other people, it may be about how do I facilitate a room? For other people, it might be how do I turn up in a community and actually start to build trust? Communication is seen in that kind of broader sense. Also, people wanted public-friendly search tools and research alerts. Part of the piece of all of this was that for people outside of the research world, this sense that maybe things were going on that they needed to know about, but they had no mechanism to actually find out about them. So in terms of, oh, there's new research happening about muscular dystrophy. Well, how on earth do I know that? And even if I did know that, you know, would I even understand what that research is? So that idea of having public-friendly search tools and a mechanism whereby for people who may be interested, that they'd be able to access that. And also that there'd be greater support to and from public bodies for open research. Now, there's a lot in that. And part of what started it was the suggestion that the public library system might be a mechanism whereby people could start to engage a little bit more. That the public library system, and I'm sure many of you are aware that the public library system is not a single system. It's a system that's embedded in each local authority. So it runs in slightly different ways. But if you were an individual living in Roscommon, that potentially you could go to Boyle, or you could go, you know, to Roscommon town in order to be able to have a space where you could engage, you could access, and you could also have a meaningful conversation with somebody about certain research. So there was that side to it, but then there was also the side about actually the public sector needs more access and needs more of an understanding of what research is and how it does and how to engage with researchers. The second area in terms of fair partnership, stop me if you've heard this one before, but financial recognition for communities. And I suppose I don't really need to say a huge amount with Emma in the room, because Emma, I think, has done so much in this area, but I think you would acknowledge as well, we have so much more left to do. It's still incredibly unclear in terms of financial recognition and how we do that, how we do it successfully. We are not talking about every time a researcher engages with somebody else, they have to pay them. We don't want to create that kind of scenario where it becomes somehow some kind of exchange that is only understood in economic terms. That doesn't work, and it diminishes everybody. However, at the same time, oftentimes the community member or the stakeholder member is the only person working for free. Everybody else is getting paid. Partnership plans are written at the start of projects. We do appreciate that as projects develop, relationships change and duties can change, but that the issue is that there was a desire to have something on paper at the start so that at least everybody could get their intentions down on paper. The third part there about power sharing exists in the same way as that we don't assume that researchers are born with communication skills. We don't assume that researchers automatically are good at doing collaboration and power sharing. So, and I don't mean that they're not willing to share power. I mean that they are not necessarily equipped to understand the dynamics that exist, because sometimes the researcher is the one actually in the weak position in terms of trying to engage with the community, where you've got really, really strong gatekeepers saying, don't talk to her. You know, she's from Trinity, or she's from UCD, or, you know, she's doing X or Y. So sometimes you're not the person in the situation of help. But that piece about understanding how power sharing works and how to negotiate that. So there is that piece about training as well on collaboration and power sharing. and that also the whole area of community researchers being supported. So there are lots of areas where community researchers play a role. So these would often be somebody with a lived experience, anybody who's involved in research around the effects of homelessness may have engaged with community researchers. So these are people who've had a direct lived experience of homelessness who actually act as peer researchers and are involved in data gathering and data analysis as well, but with other researchers. That oftentimes they kind of exist as satellites that are attached to particular projects. There's no real opportunity for those peer researchers to come together and understand any kind of level of commonality, any kind of direct experience. So there was that kind of desire in there to try and understand how this kind of nascent community could be supported. The third area, the third destination around knowledge exchange, there was that piece about really hammering home the idea of mutual learning happening. Also that ways in which we could better understand and acknowledge and celebrate lived cultural and local experiences to researchers. And just in case anybody in the back of their head is kind of going, oh, well, that all sounds very well, Michael, but that's not really very relevant. We are talking about the aspects of these things that are actually relevant to what research you're doing, what your research agenda is, how you're actually going to design your project so that your participants actually stay in it and stay with it. How are you going to disseminate that? Potentially, even how are you going to gather your data? How are you going to analyze it? But also, how is your research going to have an impact and an effect? Understanding these other aspects that are not specifically the discipline are incredibly useful in terms of you having successful research projects. The third part, research literacy and usage exists across Irish charities and NGOs. For any of you who deal with NGOs, that there is a huge variety of expertise there. Some are very well developed, have research units, commission their own research. As Emma said, I'm on the St. John of God Research Foundation, which does a lot of work with UCD, incredibly well developed, very sophisticated view of the approaches to the commissioning of the purpose of research. Then you have other NGOs that are literally run out of the kitchen table because somebody's child has a condition and there's only maybe 300 children in the whole world that have that. And they are up until 2 o'clock in the morning emailing somebody in Singapore who is experiencing the same thing. So there is that piece about how do we build better literacy so that people get better use out of it and can engage more with research. The same is also true of Irish civil and public servants. And I don't want to say that civil servants don't stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm sure they do as well. But the infrastructure is different and the supports that they might need are different, but also what they can contribute would be very different as well. And there's also that piece about critical thinking and researcher skills as part of our wider education experience. And anybody who's involved in education research knows that there is now a new curriculum at primary level. Again, one of my previous jobs as a primary school teacher, that there's much more of an exploration now in terms of the curriculum around STEM and how that works. There's a real opportunity there in terms of looking at building critical thinking from an early stage. I think if French primary school children can do philosophy, I think we could probably manage it ourselves. So the fourth area is around those systems. And of course, people want interoperability. So often institutions build repositories. The repository in Trinity is Tara. But that there are moves afoot, and it is only appropriate that you don't necessarily need to know where what it is you're looking for has come from in order to be able to find it. So it would be almost like if somebody was driving, that they'd have to pull in and out of every cul-de-sac in order to get to the destination that they're looking for. That what we want is to have interoperability, so you can do a single search and they can say, oh, that's in the UCD repository, that's in the Trinity repository, that's in the Maynooth repository. The systems are designed for use by non-researchers. This does not mean creating new systems. It's creating new skins so that there is the potential for people who are non-researchers to be able to do the kinds of searches that are meaningful to them and using the kind of approaches that they would need. There's diverse research outputs. And again, this is a tricky one, but again, it's that idea about how, as institutions, do we actually value, and how funders value diverse research outputs, how they value a video that you might make, how they value an educational resource you might create out of your research, as opposed to only valuing peer-reviewed journal publications or conference presentations. How are those other outputs actually valued, and how are they encouraged, and how are they funded at a national level as well, and how do they coalesce? How can we actually start to search those things? Research is as open as possible and as closed as necessary, and that this is one of those pieces that I think we always need to grapple with, both at an individual project level. For example, in the Trinity Centre for Ageing and Intellectual Disability, they have the IDS Tilde, which is about growing older as somebody with an intellectual disability in Ireland. Even though the data sets there do not have people's names and addresses, the numbers are comparatively small enough that if you have enough data points, we'll be able to actually identify somebody. And that is why there is not this just a kind of, right, we're going to just make the whole data set available. It is not appropriate. It's not appropriate to the privacy of the people that have consented and continue to consent to be part of that study. So there is that piece in terms of individual projects. There's also that wider piece about stuff that was actually starting to happen when we were doing the project. I'm loath to start talking about the kinds of stuff that started happening in January of this year around entire data sets from the US going missing. I'm sure plenty of people in this room have experienced that and saw it. Our own researcher, Dr. Autumn Brown, who is from North Carolina, that this was stuff that she was seeing in real time, and she was engaging with her US colleagues around this. But also, what was also emerging as well at the time was that our colleagues over in the Netherlands, who were going for 100% open access, suddenly had, with the invasion of Ukraine, suddenly had a change of heart about this idea of we're going to make everything 100% open. And so they have actually rolled back from their goal of making everything 100% open in order to try to look again at, in a hostile world, what do you make open and what do you not make open? This, to their eyes and to our eyes, is not an excuse to kind of go, yeah, well, the agenda is dead then. It is not dead. It is very much not dead. And there is a huge amount of stuff that can remain open and can be useful to communities. And in fact, if we were to allow international geopolitics to actually affect the kind of communities-based work that we are doing, then actually the hostile forces have really won if they've actually shut down the kinds of things that make the societies that we have worth defending. But systems are designed with accessibility in mind. Anybody who is involved in disability issues and accessibility issues in that and want to make sure that we don't end up building a system that's wonderful but remains inaccessible. And beside the European Accessibility Act will probably prevent us from doing that anyway, but it is about saying, yeah, this is actually what we want. And the last area then is about communities shaping research priorities. As Kevin Quaid from Lewy Body Ireland says, Michael, we don't always just want to be answering the questions. Sometimes we want to be asking the questions. And I think that there is a piece to this where things like community advisory panels, and some of you may already be working with community advisory panels. The example I always give is the DRAT, which is the Dementia Research Advisory Team that I would have helped to encourage in their early days with the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland. But that is a group of people living with dementia and people who support somebody living with dementia coming together in order to discuss research, to look at what research is happening, to engage with researchers, and to help them to develop research projects. And if anybody, again, is sitting there going, I don't like the sound of that, suffice to say that any advisory panels I've ever worked with, they really want research to happen. As a colleague of mine says, the advisory panel are the only people who ever say anything nice to me. That it's that idea of having allies that want the research to be good, want it to be effective, want it to make a difference. Because basically sometimes their lives or their site or their family depends on it. So the advisory teams and advisory panels are often incredibly supportive of good practice and good research. So if you are doing good practice, if you are doing good research, then this can be a real ally to you. If you are not doing that, well, then you shouldn't be doing research in the first place. Community impact assessment. Part of the piece to all of this is, and a number of people in this room know this anyway, that there's an awful lot of talk at the moment about how do we talk about the impact of research. Communities have stuff to say about that. How do we create processes where communities can actually articulate that? And Liz, having done an impact framework for public and patient involvement, probably has a lot to say about it herself. But it's definitely something whereby, particularly for researchers that might otherwise struggle in terms of, well, what is the wider impact of this? That actually communities can often articulate that. A group of civil servants can actually articulate, well, this was it by engaging with that researcher. This was the kind of stuff that happened. These were the circulars that got changed. This was the piece of policy that got changed. This was this. Interaction between universities and communities improves. Yes, please. And that obviously that is not a one size fits all, but it's an endeavour that this kind of thing would happen and that we try to work out how to improve that relationship. Community-led research can access sustainable financial support. So, as I said already, for my colleagues in St John of God, they ring-fence budget in order to be able to commission research, but that there is a piece there about that there are lots of NGOs that don't have the luxury of that, and that potentially projects or funding strands in the past, let's say like new foundations, but they always needed the academic to be leading them, that actually that there may be new ways in which to look at that mean that the financial support is actually embedded in the community and the researcher can access it out of that, as is a bit more coherent with the HRD, HRCI scheme. Communities are represented on research boards and committees. This only came up at the Research Ireland Think-In on citizen science, if anybody was there, and where somebody asked a question, me, about, you know, that it is incredibly useful and laudable that Research Ireland want to see this level of engagement. Are they learning anything from the National Research Ethics Committee's approach to having lived experience on the ethics boards? And that they said there are really interesting models. There are things like citizen jury models and things like that that can help to inform the way in which we actually do stuff in Research Ireland. And anybody who's engaging with Research Ireland, you know that their watchword now is that they want to be more than a funder. Please add your own musical. You know, I'm just like, more than a funder. Other people are, more than a funder. And anybody who's been totally asleep or doing other work now while doing this, is now back in the room. So whatever way in which you want to consider that, there is huge scope in terms of them playing a role in this agenda and bringing wider society much closer to the way in which research gets thought about, gets commissioned, gets thought of in the context of its wider implications for society. No more singing. And then the last part is about communities actively advocating for involvement in research. And this is almost like a bit of an extension on the advisory panels. Oftentimes you would read stuff in a roadmap like this, where it all feels a bit like a laundry list of this is what we want from academia, or this is what we want from funders. And oftentimes it doesn't always necessarily capture what communities are bringing to this. And the reality is that for a lot of people, a community is actually incredibly supportive of research. They are actively interested, sometimes annoyingly so, as I said, but that they are really actively interested. They want to see things happen, and that they want to actively advocate for more attention, more resources, more opportunities for the research to live within the wider community. So I think it's really important in terms of the roadmap that it doesn't just become a thing where researchers or academia needs to do more. Everybody needs to do more. And that includes our various stakeholder communities, be they civil and public servants need to do more, communities need to do more, NGOs need to do more. Everybody needs to do more. And at this point, it is a situation where everybody potentially has a role if they choose to take it, including the people in this room as well. So in terms of the roadmap, they're the destinations that we're getting to. In terms of how we're rolling this forward, really this year and next year is about kind of establishing what's there, trying to coordinate a little bit more and aligning things. Then what we'd like to do is we'd like for 2028 to be a point where there's a bit more learning and capacity building and piloting in terms of what's emerging. And then moving into 2029 in terms of trying to embed things and scale things and normalize things a little bit more. And then really getting to 2030 and beyond, it's really about consolidating the journey and also trying to optimize it, look at kind of quality improvement aspects to this. How do we deepen it? Are there areas that have remained untouched that actually would be really ripe for different kind of activity? So in the thing itself, we have like a little bit more detail in terms of how those things would be created. But right now we're kind of at the end of the beginning. So what are we doing right now? So we are building awareness. As you know, because I am here, we are building awareness. We are also tapping into existing communities of practice. So that means kind of public sector knowledge brokerage work that's going on that a number of you in the room might be aware of. The work that's going on around engaged research, around public engagement, and around PPI. We also want to identify a base camp organisation or body which can show leadership and champion connection. Now, the thing is that for those of you who know about the National Open Research Forum, you know that it did exist within the Royal Irish Academy. The Royal Irish Academy's relationship with that is now winding down, and IRL in Maynooth will actually be taking that over. And therefore, the work that we do over the coming months is really about trying to understand whether IRL becomes the natural home for this, becomes the secretariat for it, can actually continue to sustain it. While that happens, in Trinity Civic Engagement, we're continuing to mind this as a project. And who knows, we may end up adopting it in the end if nobody else wants to mind it, but it is not going to be cast out into the world because people actually care about it enough to want to commit to seeing it happen. And enough people in the other engagements so far have actually signed up to wanting to work on particular aspects of it. So we want to ensure that that is maintained into the medium to long term. And that the one thing that Trinity has committed to is that we'll have an annual convening event where we bring people together who are interested, who do want to be involved. And with the way that we talk about it is that it's going to be a bit like a COP, but without the kind of delegate whole thing. It's going to be a COP where basically people come together. So it's an opportunity to hear what's happening in the different areas, but it's also an opportunity for people to sit together, do deals, figure out what they could apply for, figure out like what's happening. But it's an opportunity for people who care about these wider things to get together on an annual basis in order to try and work that out. And Trinity has committed to supporting this. And so the first one in 2027 will be in Trinity, but that doesn't mean that it has to be in Trinity going forward, but that Trinity will continue to support it to 2030. So we'll buy the sandwiches. And they'll be great. They'll be lovely sandwiches, because that's how you build communities. Tea, coffee, sandwiches. So really, I suppose the last bit is to invite you yourselves, either online or here in the room, now that you know what the destinations are, and now that you know what are the pieces that exist within it, that if you scan the QR code, and I can put the link in the link may already be in the chat, but that it's an opportunity for you either now or later on to go down through those things. And if there's a particular aspect of this that speaks to you directly or speaks to work that you've already done, let's say around the interoperability of systems, or that speaks to work you've already done with community researchers or with advisory panels, then you can let us know that that's an area that you're interested in, and then we'll be getting back in contact with you. And from that point onwards, then we'll be trying to draw people with a similar interest together so that we actually have that opportunity to pool our resources and be able to move that aspect of the roadmap forward. That is it, except to acknowledge my incredible colleagues, Professor Johanna Ivers, Dr. James Brunton, Dr. Louise Hopper, Tracy Jane Cassidy, that's me, Kathy Ann Kelly, and Dr. Autumn Brown, and also the people who were involved in the advisory group. Sheila Donegan is in SCTU, Mary Doyle in the Royal Irish Academy, Kathy Foley in Research Ireland, Lisa Keating in the IUA, Avril Kennan in Health Research Charities Ireland, and Dermot Linnett in Maynooth University, who is now heading up the Irish Reproducibility Network. I have gotten that wrong once before, I called it something else, and I'm glad to have gotten it right this time. You can see then the funders under the North scheme as well are the HEA and Dorris in the government, and this was a Trinity and DCU co-production. I feel like I've just done the credits there. So yeah, so we have 5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes for questions.
Yeah. So